All right, so this is the first part of chapter 19 in the book. I've broken it up because I don't like the way they've laid out information. I think we're giving you stuff too soon near the end of the chapter that doesn't need to be covered at this point in the semester, and I don't think it all should have been in one chapter. There's also a few things in this that are not in the chapter itself. So we're looking at reading arguments and getting started with your research. All right, so what you want to do is when you're looking at controversies, which is what most of the research should be on. I mean, why don't write a research paper on established fact? You want to study those in depth and you want to look for complexities. This is a problem with a lot of arguments in the United States is they don't tend to deal with the complexity of an issue. So where you can find different controversies if you're having trouble coming up with an idea is there are databases, and I'll do a short lecture on the databases in the library, such as pro, con, and opposing viewpoints. You can also go to Yahoo's issues and causes directory. So Yahoo, unlike Google, is a search engine that has directories within it, and they have an issues and causes subdirectory. All right, now what you need to do, and this is for all papers, so not just for this class, but you need to analyze the assignment. So what's actually being asked of you? How long or short should the essay or the paper be? What format are you being asked to write it in? And are there any other specific requirements? So for this one, there is a requirement that you use a certain number of sources from the school's databases because I want to ensure that you can use the school's databases, especially since you're much more likely to find good source material coming from peer-reviewed journals, which makes up a good portion of our databases and any college's databases. And then what's the due date? Now there's something here called backwards planning, which I wish I had a whiteboard to show you. What we mean by this is something I learned when I was working in marketing for an internet company back in Silicon Valley. And it's a very good skill to develop, not just for your schoolwork, but if you go out and work in the corporate world and you're required to, uh, you know, uh, complete projects for your company, backwards planning works very well. So what you do is you say, all right, the backwards plan is you establish the paper is due, let's say on June 30th, and you know it will take you a week to write the final draft. So you say on June 23rd, I must have the first draft completed so I can begin the second draft. Now you know it's going to take you 2 to 3 weeks to write well, let's say it's going to take you a week to write the first draft. So you say, all right, so if on the 23rd I have to have the first draft finished and it takes me a week, then I should start writing that on June 16th. And then you say, but I'm going to need to gather research, and it's going to take me 2 weeks to gather research, so I should start on May 30th to start the research project. That's backwards planning. Figure out what steps are required to complete the project, and then work your way backwards from the finished product to the steps, the one before the finished product, and the second to the last one, and then the third to the last, and work your way back until you get your starting point from when you need to start that. That's backwards planning. All right, now you want to, when you're doing the research paper, there are on the assignment sheet there's suggestions, but you may research anything that you find interest in. However, you do have to get approval from me for that. So what you need to do is ask a question that the paper is going to answer. So you could ask, do students who have Facebook accounts do better or worse in college, or the same as students who don't have, right? Or as I had put up here, how can we make college more affordable? There's a question, and probably one that you're very interested in. Then what you do is you focus the research and the paper on answering that question. How do we make this more affordable? I actually did that in one semester. I was so tired of our government saying we can't do this, we can't do that, that I made my students write proposal uh, papers on how do we solve certain issues. All right. Once you have your issue, what you have to ask yourself, is it narrow enough for the length of the paper? A lot of times you'll pick a broad topic and you need to narrow it down and so get a subtopic of the major topic. Once you do that, develop your claim, what you're actually going to try to argue for. Gather your information by reading and then consider the topical critically. Is it a debatable topic? Are there people who would be for you and against you as far as your claim? And is it focused enough to be able to cover significantly? Because you can write on anything in 7 to 10 pages, but if a topic's too broad, it's going to be a very superficial paper that really doesn't go into any depth. You want to narrow that topic so that you can get into some depth into the meat of the. All right, sources. There's three types that book talks about. I'm going over this quickly because we're going to go much more into detail with this when we actually look at MLA. But your primary sources are sources you happen to create. So this is your own research you might have done, surveys you may have conducted, or what happens more often than not in these classes, because it's just a freshman, sophomore level class, is interviews. You can have interviews with people. You can do surveys. I've had people do that, but you got to be careful, and we'll talk about surveys later. Then secondary sources, and this will be your primary, I'm sorry, your main uh, source material is going to be these secondary sources. This is written by those who are not part of the original study survey or interview, but have gathered the information from the primary sources and now are giving it to you uh, secondhand. But it works best because they gather several sources. And so within a secondary source, you may have a number of primary sources being quoted or paraphrased or summarized. And then tertiary sources you do not see very often. I'm not even sure why the book lists it, but I put it here because they do. These are reports of research, and why you would bother with those, I have no idea. Anyway, you're going to mostly have secondary. You may conduct your own primary, and that's great, but you've got to be careful with that, and we'll talk about that. All right, once you're writing the research proposal, uh, which is the next thing your book talks about and which you have to do for this class. I think it's 5 or 10% of your grade. I think it's 5%. What you need to do is write just a short introductory paragraph that explains your idea and why it is important. Why does this matter to an audience? Uh, then your description paragraph just kind of explains your main idea and the question that's going to be answered by your paper. And again, that both of these paragraphs can be very short. Your writing, your research proposal should be less than a page. And then your plan, your book goes into more depth than what I'm going to ask for. I just want to have an idea of how you plan to support it. So you need to have at least found a couple of sources before you submit your research proposal. Say, so I have these sources and I'll be going along these lines to support my. All right, now critical thinking prompts. You want to compare your issue with something in the same or different category to help give you some ideas. And then you have to make sure that people will agree and disagree with it. Now, analyze it by considering its different parts and then evaluate it as good or bad, valuable or invaluable. So there's no need to be doing a research paper that nobody's going to find any value in. All right. All right. Critical reading. This is when you're looking at your sources, you need to analyze your text. So you ask these questions. What's the context? Context. Where, when, and how was it published? It matters. If it's been published too long ago, it may no longer. I mean, if you're writing a paper on climate change and you're using a source from 1960, more than likely that isn't going to be very helpful. Uh, where was it published and what type of document. If it's published in the National Enquirer, you probably can't trust it. If it's published in a peer-reviewed medical journal, yes, you can. What's the main idea of the paper? What's it trying to convey? Is it supported? This is the major question you have to ask always with anything. Has it been supported with credible, objective support? And then what's the purpose of the paper? Is there an agenda? This is again why you go to where and how it was published. Many times you can realize, wait a minute, there's an agenda here. And this is definitely slanted a certain way in order to accomplish the agenda. All right, when you're reading your first reading, just preview the essay and get background info. So you want to make sure you know the writer's bio. Do you trust the writer? Look at the title. The title a lot of times will give you a lot of information. Look at any subsections. So subtitles of the if it's a longer work. Just skim the article, get an idea of what it's about, and then before rereading, express in your own words what you've learned. Now, another thing is you're doing research, make sure you have a couple of terms that are important that need to be included in your source material. Because what you can do is do a Control F on a Windows machine or a Command F on a Mac, and then search for that term. And if it doesn't show up in the paper, I mean, if in the search box it says zero, you've got a source that isn't any use to you. So quickly go on to the next. All right, if you have a second reading, look for the claims and subclaims. Look for all major support, right? And think critically, do you trust that support? And look for common ground and analyze that. So common ground in both sides of the argument. And then always annotate and underline and summarize. I mean, you can do all of your research online if you want. I tend to like to print things out and I tend to like to annotate them because then it allows me to do a little bit more in depth than just trying to read it off a screen. And make sure you understand all the key words. All right, be careful of that you do know what is actually being said and you understand everything said. Now, any additional reading, you want to look at what evidence or support is needed or given. Make sure it's reasonable. All right, there was a guy a couple of years back when gas was over $4 a gallon, was had a website with lots of followers that said we don't have to worry about running out of oil. The earth will make more. And it will the next time that all the dinosaurs die and a million years go by. The earth's not going to make more oil. We may discover more, but it's not going to make more. It's fossil fuel for a reason. That's not reasonable. Look for any bias. This is a little bit harder to do than whether something's reasonable. And especially if what you're reading supports your own beliefs. We tend to overlook bias when what we're reading reinforces what we believe. We're less critical. Doesn't matter if you're liberal, conservative, or neither. That's just human nature. So be careful of that. And then look at how the piece concludes. Is it a restatement of the thesis? Is there a call to action? That can also tell you if there's any kind of bias. All right, that's it for this, like the first half. We'll do the second half of this chapter in another area where it won't even be called chapter 19, but hopefully that's enough for you to get you started on the research paper.